This is Joyce Dukes, Intervention Support Coordinator for the Office of Specialized Services.
And my name is Renee Boyce. I'm also an intervention support coordinator for the Office of Specialized Services. We'd like to welcome you to teachers new to or changing to intensive learning support. Some of you may be new to the district and coming to an intensive learning support for the very first time, while others of you may be changing support types. For example, you may be coming from a learning support class or an autistic support class. Now you will be working with an intensive learning support class. This presentation is for both types of teachers.
So let's take a look at our objectives for today. We want you to be able to understand where intensive learning support fits into the components of the newly developed special education instructional framework. We also want to work with you to understand the definition of intensive learning support. We want to assist you in understanding what you need to know to get started as a teacher new to intensive learning support. And finally, we want to work with you to understand best practices for working in a hybrid model, that's both in person and virtual, with students with complex learning disabilities. So, what is this special education instructional framework? It's a newly created structure and foundation for understanding and implementing programming for students with disabilities here in the School District of Philadelphia. It is one way of bringing a measure of uniformity to the complex structure of special education. So, what is the purpose of the framework? The purpose of creating this framework was to enhance the delivery of services to our students and to communicate the technical, logistical, and instructional expectations for special education programming. These frameworks incorporate a nationwide, multi-year synthesis of research in the area of best practices in the field of special education. Over the course of 2 years, an inter-university writing team assembled by the Council for Exceptional Children and the CEDAR Center culled the national research data and developed a list of what they defined as the highest leverage practices in special education. In more colloquial terms, they looked at what practices can educators implement that will give them the most quote unquote bang for their buck when working with students with disabilities. Inside the district, interoffice teams came together last year to review these highest leverage practices. These teams consisted of school-based special and general educators across different grade bands, staff from the Office of Specialized Services, staff from curriculum instruction and assessment, early childhood, multilingual, teaching and learning, and the Office of High Schools. These district teams spent last school year collaborating, developing, and soliciting feedback on incorporating these high leverage practices into a usable framework that would have meaning within the district. This is an ongoing process that we need you to participate in, and we have information on how you can access the full framework document for your review. So let's just take a brief look at some of these high leverage practices, and we'll be reviewing them later, specifically in terms of how they relate to intensive learning support. But just for an overview, the high leverage practices are presented in terms of domains. So there's a domain of collaboration, which centers on effective and purposeful collaboration involving multiple stakeholders. There's a focus on assessment, where teachers are expected to use multiple sources of data to assess the complex needs and strengths of students with disabilities. There's also a focus on social, emotional, and behavioral issues. That centers on how teachers can utilize strategies to promote social and emotional well-being in their students. And of course, there's a focus on instruction, How well-designed instruction that is strategic, flexible, and recursive is critical to special education. Lastly, there's the area of compliance, and the high leverage practices outline the compliance best practices defined by state and federal law. These high leverage practices have been compiled into a manual that is broken down by those areas that I just reviewed. And if you visit our ILS asynchronous session links, you'll see a live link to the full document entitled High Leverage Practices in Special Education. It runs about 135 pages, and it is very interesting reading.
Now, we don't expect you to read, excuse me, Joyce, we don't expect you to read the book all in one setting, but it is a required reading for any special education teacher in the school district of Philadelphia.
Now let's take a look at an overview of the framework itself in terms of how it's laid out for you. And we'll provide you with a link to that document as well, that full document. So we reviewed the background in terms of how it was linked into high leverage research practices. And the expectation, as Renee just said, is that all of our teachers, both regular and special educators, will utilize this framework in conjunction with the reading and math frameworks to provide appropriate special education supports and services to all students with disabilities. The expectation is also that school leaders will use the framework to monitor and support teachers and special education assistants. So what is the actual format? When you open up the document, you'll see that the framework is divided by support. And in each chapter of support type, you'll see the section starts with secondary transition. And then it moves on to those high leverage domains that we reviewed of collaboration, assessment, social emotional behavior, instruction, compliance. There's also a section on principal look-fors as it relates to specific support types. There's a section on the role of the special education assistant by support type. Sections on considerations for digital learning, and sections with guidance for assistant superintendents, principals, and teachers. And again, if you visit our asynchronous session links, you'll find a live link to this full document, Special Education Instructional Framework. And again, Renee, as you were saying, it's not light reading, as with the high leverage practices. It's quite lengthy, but it's also very thorough. And we definitely want input from all of the teachers and school-based administrators that will be using this framework.
Absolutely. This is a work in progress, and we really would welcome any input and additional support that you believe that would need to be included in this document.
So let's take a few minutes to look at the definition for intensive learning support. The definition for intensive learning support is going to look a bit different than the other support types that you may have reviewed. This support type was not found in state law, Chapter 14, nor is it found in federal special education law. This is a designation that was developed here in the School District of Philadelphia by some of our learning networks. They created the concept of an intensive learning support classroom based on the need to provide a more responsive classroom setting for special education students that persistently struggle academically. The ILS setting provides specific ways to further intensify specially designed instruction. The ILS setting serves grade bands K-2, 3-5, and 6-8. ILS is intended to help a small subgroup of students receiving learning support who are not meeting individualized education program goals, have persistently low academic achievement, are not making adequate progress in their current intervention program, who may have deficits in self-regulation and executive function that impact their academic performance, who may need to make an average rate of improvement greater than that achieved in the traditional learning support setting, and students who require teachers who have mastered the evidence-based instructional practice, instructional decision-making, assessment, and professional collaboration that are required for effectively educating students with multi-layered and complex learning disabilities. Now, generally, intensive learning support starts with the IEP team. Since it's not a federal or state designation, it's a decision that the IEP team would come to, and that would include both the parents and guardian, who, as you know, are a part of the IEP team. And as you can see in the diagram, this is a graphic for you, all of the aspects of the IEP team that are going to influence what happens in intensive learning support. So you can see it's going to be starting with documentation of any instructional changes that are being recommended, the fidelity to which staff are adhering to those instructional changes. It's going to involve looking at whether you need to intensify academic and behavioral instruction based on data that's coming in. There's going to be a pinpointing of areas to target through specially designed instruction. Individualized goals aligned to instructional outcomes are set up. There's going to be a real leveraging of the teaming structure, making use of that team to advance intensive learning support. There's going to be the annual reviews of IEPs, but in addition, there's going to be frequent progress monitoring with curriculum-based instruction and curriculum-based measurements. There's going to be a great deal of communication with and involvement of the family, and there's going to be celebration of success when it occurs. Now, on the left of this graphic organizer, you'll see the DBI process, which stands for data-based individuation, and we're going to address that in a few slides.
So what does an ILS class look like? The physical environment could be self-contained at the elementary level, while students in the middle level may transition to their specialists, such as art, music, gym. The class may be divided into centers or areas where whole group instruction would take place, or small group instruction could take place, or maybe even a one-to-one area for teacher and student. There also might be a stress reduction area. The physical space is organized so that everything is labeled and everything is stored. Furniture will allow for students to flow between the centers and the spaces, while essential materials will be labeled and accessible both to the staff as well as the students.
Now, in terms of classroom procedures, you're going to see those displayed very prominently. And then you'll see procedures for how the centers are going to be used. You'll see procedures for transitioning between activities and locations. And you'll see procedures for how materials and supplies are supposed to be used. You're also going to see a master schedule displayed. Teachers have been asked to generate a master schedule and keep that on display. That master schedule will outline the instructional areas and the activities that are taking place in those areas, as well as the staff assignments. Now, while the intensive learning support student does not have a primary diagnosis of emotional or behavioral disturbance, and we'll talk about that in a few slides, many of our students, because they've struggled so long with the academic areas of reading and math. Sometimes they have developed very frustrating and difficult behaviors. So we put a great emphasis on positive behavior support in the intensive learning support classroom. And one of the things you're going to see surrounding positive behavior support is errorless, explicit teaching and practice of behavior and routines. You're also going to notice that there's a ratio of about 5 positive interactions between adults and students to every 1 negative or corrective interaction.
Well, we have come to our not first high leverage practice intensive instruction. I wanted to just take a brief moment to let you know that there are 22 high leverage practice high leverage practices. And so we're only going to focus in this particular training. We're actually going to just focus on intensive instruction. Why? Because we're talking about the intensive learning support classroom. But of course, when you look through the manual, you're actually going to see quite a few of the high leverage practices that you use. Scaffolded instruction, explicit instruction, just so many that you already use. But one of the things that we want you to use the book for is to really realize all of the components that the high leverage practices have. And it really kind of gives you an opportunity for yourself to just kind of compare where we are and what we're doing in each practice. Today we're going to focus, as I said, on intensive instruction. So intensive instruction, let's take a good look at that. So the students in this class, the teacher of the students in this class will match the intensity of their instruction with the learning challenges or the needs of the student. That match is very critical. And that's what Joyce talked about in terms of mentioning all of the data that's collected by the IEP team. All of that information is going to be tailored such a way so that we'll be able to know that this particular student needs a specific type of instruction. The intensive instruction also will involve students with similar needs. So we may end up having a group of 3 or 4 for this particular need, 4 or 5 students for that particular need, but basically the need is always going to drive the program. And as you know, if we work specifically on needs, it will guide us to meeting those academic successes. The teachers will also group the students in the group. They will follow the systematic, explicit, and well-paced instruction. Those 3 things together, and you probably have heard those 3 before. Systematic is something that students critically need to routinize their learning. It's something that they can depend on, something that they know will happen, and it's something that they need in order to continue to learn. I know you've heard explicit. Well, explicit is one of our HLPs. And so explicit instruction, as we know it, is the I do, you do, I do, we do, you do. So we know for sure that you've heard these terms before, but the intensity of it is where we are going to find a difference in the intensive learning support class. It's well-paced. However, we're more concerned about the mastery than we are with the pacing. The pacing is well-paced, meaning that it's brisk, but we are more concerned with the student mastering concepts than we are with how long the pace is for the students. Also, progress monitoring is a critical component of this classroom. This is a data-based classroom, and the instruction for the students is based on data. Everything, you saw the chart that we're going to be talking about later, the database decision-making that occurs will come from data that's been gathered by the teacher. And last, within the intensive instruction, the students will have many opportunities to respond and receive immediate corrective feedback. Now, that is really one of the critical components of this classroom, because the teacher doesn't mind providing an inordinate amount, if it's needed, for immediate corrective feedback. And so those teachers are teachers that know that a might need 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 repetitions. And that is something that she signed up for once becoming a teacher in this type of classroom. Now we're going to stop our presentation here to give you a chance to prepare for this next activity. You're going to need the interactive notes to follow along and record your responses to the questions that are generated from this video. So when we stop the presentation, take a moment, find the ILS asynchronous session links file, and click on the interactive notes. It will generate a copy of those interactive notes for you. Then we start the presentation once you have your interactive notes and you're ready to proceed. And we're going to take a look together at high leverage practice number 20, intensive intervention. You're going to see in part 2 a classroom clip of a teacher demonstrating intensive intervention. So we'll stop here, give you a moment to pull up those interactive notes. Okay, here we are at the video that's entitled High Leverage Practice Number 20, Intensive Instruction. You've pulled up your interactive notes, and we're ready to go.
Welcome to our video for high leverage practice number 20, provide intensive instruction. There are 22 high leverage practices for students with disabilities spread across 4 domains. Provide intensive instruction falls under the instruction domain. The source for content in this video is from the HLP book published by CEC and the Cedar Center, a chapter by Devin Kearns and his colleagues in the HLP for Inclusive Classrooms book, and the National Center on Intensive Intervention website. This video is split into 2 parts. In part 1, we provide a definition and rationale for intensifying instruction. In part 2, we highlight components of the data-based individualization process championed by the National Center on Intensive Intervention. Part 1, definition and rationale. In a school-wide, multi-tiered system of support, the highest level of support is intensive intervention. Typically, this level of intervention, often referred to as Tier 3, is delivered by special educators, interventionists, and other learning or behavior specialists. Intensive intervention is not a specific product or tool, but rather a process educators use to identify and provide evidence-based instruction for students with disabilities who demonstrate severe and persistent learning needs. In practice, intensifying intervention can mean reducing the size of instructional groups, adding instructional time to target a student-specific area of deficit, integrating academic or behavioral supports, tightening the link between student needs and intervention, and using strategies and tools that are not utilized in Tier 1 or even Tier 2. More intense intervention means students receive many opportunities to practice skills or other areas of need, and also receive individualized feedback. All decisions about the type and extent of intense instruction students receive is typically made by a team of professionals referencing student performance data, but it can also be completed by an individual special educator. Research indicates that it may take students with intensive needs, including those with disabilities, as much as 10 to 30 times more practice to master a skill compared to peers without disabilities. This means the dosage and pace of general education classroom instruction, and even some Tier 2 intervention programs, may be a mismatch for the individualized needs of many students with disabilities. Even when the evidence-based practices and intervention programs are used, some students still do not make adequate progress. They require something more. The National Center on Intensive Intervention's approach to intensifying instruction for students with significant needs is a process called data-based individualization, or DBI. DBI is a team process, not a specific program. It requires teachers with expertise in intervention and assessment in order to ensure successful implementation. DBI is a research-based process for individualizing and intensifying instruction through the systematic use of validated intervention programs, progress monitoring, diagnostic data, and research-based adaptation strategies. The DBI process is not for every student. Only the small group of students with the most severe and persistent learning or behavioral challenges. DBI is most likely to be effective when it is layered on top of high-quality, evidence-based instruction at Tiers 1 and 2 and implemented by skilled professionals. We expand upon DBI in Part 2 of this video. In sum, for Part 1, there is a need for intensive intervention due to the large number of students who need more than standard remediation to succeed. The need for intensive intervention is determined when teachers, using progress monitoring data, note that a student is not making progress toward IEP goals, or has not responded or improved with additional supports in general education, and when also receiving supplemental Tier 2 instruction. Intensive intervention takes many forms, which we highlight in the next segment of this video. Part 2. Components of the data-based individualization process. Data-based individualization, as described by the NCII, has 4 key components, which recur as needed based on available student performance data. The components are 1. Using a standard protocol intervention program with fidelity. 2. Regularly monitoring student progress. 3. Collecting diagnostic data in areas of concern. And 4. Making data-driven adaptations to intervention offerings. These steps often occur concurrently and also recur as needed, and are usually implemented by a team of professionals, but can also be implemented by individual special educators. Once a student is identified for intensive intervention, teachers utilize a validated intervention package, which functions as the platform where high-quality supplemental intervention is provided with fidelity. The intervention package can be for academics or behavior. Experts from the NCII recommend that schools acquire a specific and validated program to provide this standard protocol instruction. Teachers may need access to multiple programs based on students' unique needs. The NCII provides reviews of intervention and assessment tools through a searchable database available on the center website. In instances where a validated program is not available, teachers should ensure that they are providing a steady course of explicit instruction and other evidence-based practices in the domain where they are providing student support. An important question for teachers using the DBI process is to consider the extent to which the standard protocol intervention platform is an appropriate match for the student's instructional needs. In this first clip, used courtesy of the Southeast Regional Educational Laboratory at
Now pull up your interactive notes because this is the classroom clip that those notes are going to be referring to. And be prepared to take notes and answer questions.
Florida State University. Watch as Ms. Jill Ozog guides a small group of students in blending and segmenting words as they learn about syllables. She first models the skill and then guides her students in practice. The students are using manipulatives and have multiple opportunities to practice and receive feedback while engaging in this evidence-based curriculum. Okay, remember, we've been talking about syllables, and syllables are parts of the word, okay? Okay, remember, the words are broken down, so I want you to watch me. I'm going to say the word flower. Flower, okay? Now, can you say flower? Flower. Okay, now we're going to break flower apart. Flower. Okay, now watch. Are you watching? I'm going to blend it back together. Flower. Right, now let's read flower. Okay, now I'm going to let you try. Okay, so I'm going to give you the cards. I want you to line up the cards together. Alright. Okay, so they're together. Ready? The word is monkey. Say monkey. Monkey. Okay, separate the word by syllable. Monkey. And now blend it back together. Monkey. Okay, say turtle. Turtle. Okay, let's break it apart. Okay, let's blend it back together. Great job. Let's try apple. Okay, let's blend it back together. Good job. Let's try the word puppet. First syllable, pup. Okay, blend it back together. Okay, and let's try apple. Let's try it. First syllable, second syllable. Let's blend it back together. Okay, watch me. Apple. Let's try it together. Ready? First syllable. Apple. Second syllable. Put it together. Good job. The second step.
And we'll return to this video a little bit later in the presentation when we look at in more depth at the database individualization process.
Okay, you can start.
We just saw a face-to-face lesson on phonemic awareness. Now let's take a look at what a phonemic awareness activity virtually would look like.
Hi, today I'm going to show you how to use the National Center on Intensive Intervention's lesson plans for literacy to provide more intensive instruction for students in a virtual setting. You would first go to the intensiveintervention.org website, check out the intervention materials, and click on literacy. When you get to the main page, you'll notice at the top, there is a comprehensive guide to help you use the literacy lesson plans that are available below. The lesson plans are designed to focus on the 5 big ideas of reading. And in this case, I'm going to demonstrate a single lesson under the phonemic and phonological awareness. I would have selected the intervention lesson plan based on the needs of my student. And in this case, I've identified that blending for single syllables is what the student needs to work on. So I can use the blending phonemes to make one-syllable words, and I'll find all the materials I need under the lesson plan. In this case, you'll see at the top, it tells me the objective, and I can make sure that aligns with the needs of my students. It also lists the suggested materials I would need. Because I'll be delivering this in a virtual setting, I'm not going to use manipulatives like blocks or magnetic letters, and instead I'm going to have my student use their fingers. I also see that it asks me for a timer and graph paper. I can use my iPhone or a regular timer. And the graph paper, you'll notice, is on page 4, so it's already in the lesson plan if needed. In this case, it tells me that the lesson is only about 5 minutes long, and that I can do it either in an individual or a group setting. Now, the way this lesson plan is set up, you'll notice that there are some bolded sections. Those are the things that I'll say, and then there are things that are in italics, and those are the things that give me some information about what might happen in the lesson. In this case, what I've actually done is I've printed off the lesson for myself. And that way I have it sitting right in front of me as I'm working with my student in a virtual setting. I've also highlighted the bolded sections to make it easier for me to be able to implement the lesson. I'm about to show you what it looks like in a virtual setting with a student. Hi, Connor. How's it going?
Good.
Good. Today we're going to put sounds together to make a word. We call this blending because we blend the sounds into a word. I want you to listen. Wash. I'll blend these sounds into the word wash. Now let's blend the sounds in the word together. Okay, listen, fingers up. Wash. Okay, what's the word?
Wash.
Wash. Okay, good job. Now it's your turn to blend the sounds in the word together. Okay? Do it.
Wash.
What's the word?
Wash.
Good. Wash is wash. Okay, here's another one. Okay, I'll blend these in a sound to make the word man. Okay. Now let's blend the sounds in the word together. So listen. Fingers up.
Man.
Good. What's the word?
Man.
Okay. Now it's your turn to blend the sounds into the word. Okay. Show me.
Man.
Okay. What's the word?
Man.
Good. Or man is man. So as you saw in the short video, I demonstrated how to follow the script that's in the bold, and in some cases it deviate a little bit, but the idea is to use a consistent routine. If you look down at the bottom of each of the lesson plans, it'll give you a little bit more information. If the student needed more practice with free sounds, I could use additional words. If the student was struggling, let's say they really needed more practice, I could actually step back to more two-letter sounds like at, if, or me. And as a student becomes much more proficient, then I might move up to 4 sounds in a word or even 5 sounds in a word to help them really understand this concept of blending. You'll see at the top here, there is an error correction. And I'm going to demonstrate how you could use the error correction for a student in this next video. Hi, Connor, welcome back. You've been doing so well. We've been charting your progress, and you've now met the criteria of 90% accuracy, which allows us to move on to the next level. Great job. So we've been working on 3 sounds, and now we're gonna move to 4 sounds, okay? So I want you to listen to this new one. Up. I'll blend these sounds together to make the word stop. Now let's blend the sounds in a word together, okay? Put your fingers up. What word?
Stop.
Stop. Now it's your turn to blend the sounds in the word. Okay, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Do it on your own.
Stop.
Okay, what word?
Stop.
Good. Stop is stop. So here's another one. Great. Okay, I want you to listen. Great. I'll blend these sounds in the word great. Now let's blend the sounds in the word together. Listen. Fingers up.
Great.
Okay, what word? Great. Okay, that's not quite right. I want you to listen. Great. Okay, so what word?
Great.
Great. That is correct. Great is great. Tell me what word?
Great.
Great. All right, now you do it on your own.
Great.
Okay, what word?
Great.
Great. Good job. You really sounded out the word just like you were supposed to and used your fingers to demonstrate the sounds and blend them together. Now let's practice some more. Now, as you see, as the student becomes much more proficient, you can increase the blending sound. So in this case, the student got 90% accuracy, as you'll see at the bottom of the second page of the lesson plan. The student can also track their own data, or I can do that for them, especially in a virtual setting. I want to remind folks that these scripts are designed to be models. You can adjust the difficulty and increase the independence as the student becomes more proficient with this particular skill. Now, in a virtual setting, I, as a teacher, may not have the opportunity to meet with my student every single day. So what I could do is deliver the lesson 1 or 2 times a week, and then work with the parent to help them be able to also deliver the lesson so that the student is getting multiple opportunities for practice. Keep posted as we start to share more of our lesson plan opportunities that can be done in a virtual setting, in a face-to-face setting, or even at home with parents.
You have to put it in what, the big one?
I started it. Wait a minute, it says sharing is paused. Wait a second.
Yeah. All right, we're going to begin. That was the last one we looked at was a virtual phonemic awareness activity. We're going to continue looking at some virtual strategies that you can use for your distance learning. This is a video that we would like for you to review on YouTube called Designing for Online and Distant Learning Accommodations. And so would you please go to your asynchronous folder again, and you will be able to click on this YouTube video and watch it from there as one of your links. So inside of the video, it actually gives you some critical points that we wanted you to pay close attention to. And if you could, just bring out a notepad, just jot some critical points for yourself down, or if you want to just continually go back looking at the video over and over, whatever pleases you. But it would be good for you to just to take a close look at what we consider some critical points in the YouTube video. The first one is behavior, and it really does address visual supports for students in this remote environment that will clue them in to what they're getting ready to do. So it could be a daily schedule that could be posted. It could be a timer so that they will know when the lesson begins and when it ends. Also, you know, we have students that are off task, and so we have to kind of keep their behavior in check. And so we have to have consequences with rewards for staying and completing their work. There's also sensory prep. So that's kind of getting kids ready. We've talked with a lot of teachers in our virtual classrooms, and we've heard a lot about having to just get kids ready for learning. And the physical activity could include something like walking, you know, walking to a song. It could be dancing. It could be any kind of movement, just something dealing with the sensory system to just help students know, oh, we're getting ready to start our activity. The next one is structure. So we know about structure. Structure is actually an opportunity for kids to establish a routine that they can rely on. And we've been hearing from parents that some of the structures have been disturbed. And so we really want to fall back on whatever the structure is, talking to the family, helping everybody get structure so that the student can know when it's time to get started and when their routine will begin. Visuals, again, giving you just creating visual clues for students to know really when the lesson's going to begin. When some students, you know, need a midway point. We're almost there. We have 2 more to go, and then, you know, an end to the activity so that they'll know basically when the beginning, middle, and end portions of the lesson are done. And last is the universal design for learning. And many of us are very familiar with these strategies, but for people that don't know, the universal design is actually a shift in thinking. And when you see this video on YouTube, it really will help you to understand that the shift is to removing all barriers. And so people kind of don't always follow the notion of what UDL is, and they often think it's just lowering the sidewalk so that, you know, wheelchairs can get up. It's way far more deep than that. So when you get a chance, you need to really go to the CAST website, and we have that at the end in references. But the UDL chart, it really kind of gives you a little bit about the what of learning, which is the next slide. We'll talk a little bit about that. It'll give you this is what they're known for and what they hone their teachings on. It's on, move to the next slide, Joyce. It is on engagement, which is the why of learning. helping us to really provide multiple means of engagement. And then it's the representation, which is the what of learning. And of course, providing multiple means for representation. And then the action and expression is actually the how of learning. And so, but take some time to read the video, watch the video, write some notes to yourself, and just become familiar with these virtual supports. It's a very nice video, and it provides a lot of other additional supports for you to work with your students virtually.
Now let's take a look at some of the terms that we've been using. We felt that this graphic really demonstrates that some of the terms we've been using are not truly interchangeable. It's more of a nested structure where their special education interventions are layered on top of each other. So we're starting with specially designed instruction, which is our legal mandate to make adaptations or modifications to content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. And all of this is done to address the unique needs of a child with a disability. Now, nested within that are these new high leverage practices, these evidence-based practices that we've been talking about. So the teacher would start with the intent to create specially designed instruction, and then do some thinking about what high leverage practices can be integrated into that SDI. And here's where it may vary from student to student. The learner characteristics are critical here. So some students might require more explicit instruction in terms of high leverage practices. Some students may need more scaffolded instruction. Active student engagement may be more of an issue. And as we mentioned, intensive instruction might be a critical component, or assistive and instructional technologies. So it could be one of these, it could be several of these, it could be all or many. And that takes us to our next graphic that shows again that it's not all in the same proportion. It's more like a chemical formula. What are the ingredients I'm going to be putting into my SDI, putting into my specially designed instruction? And again, you can see in the graphic, the consideration of learner characteristics is very important. So for example, if it's a student that has a memory deficit or difficulty with implementing strategies because of the memory deficit, I might have to increase the levels of intensive instruction. I might have to vary the use of high leverage practices. I might have to increase the dosage and the complexity, use more scaffolding, use more explicit instruction. But again, this is where the specially designed instruction, the specialness of special education comes in, because it's always going to look different according to each student and each student's needs. So we wanted you to also have this graphic. We felt this was very critical. This is the—
Grace, could you just go back just for a minute? I wanted to say one other thing about that.
Okay, sure.
Just one other thing.
Mm-hmm.
We often hear that, and in litigation especially, we hear that this doesn't happen enough, that the specialness of the student, the intensity of the intervention, that it doesn't happen, that all the kids get everything at the same time. This particular graphic, which we really wanted to share with you, it really does hone in on the fact that the HLPs, really, they just serve as a foundation, as a beginning. But as you get to work with the student, you're going to see that the student themselves will be giving you information that will make you change these to different types of amounts. And so I think that's one of the critical pieces that we need to take away from this particular shot, is that each child does not have the same amount of each one of these attributes. And so what you have to really do is work very well with data, which we're getting ready to talk about next. The data is what is going to differentiate a lot of what those different amounts, scaffolded instruction, and all of those different things, all of those will be different. And so the better you are at keeping data and using the intervention with fidelity, the more you will get closer to meeting and matching that need for the student accurately. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to.
This is why we liked this graphic, because it gives you the metaphor of a formula, and that formula is not going to remain constant, and it can vary from child to child, and it can vary within a child. So according to the data that the teacher is getting and soliciting, that formula may change. So this is another chart that we wanted you to have. This is called the taxonomy of intervention intensity. One of the things that we often get questioned about is if a particular intervention is being used in general education, does that mean that we cannot use it in special education? And what the research is showing, what those high leverage practices are showing, that it's more about the intensity of an intervention as opposed to the differentness of an intervention. So that you can have an intervention that's being used at tier 2 in general education. And if you increase the dosage of that intervention or the strength of that intervention, and you can see I'm going down the dimensions on the left-hand side. You'll see 7 dimensions of intervention intensity. So if I reconfigure that formula with any of these dimensions, that is going to be determining the effectiveness of the intervention. So it may just depend on the intensity and not necessarily, well, because this intervention is being used with this group of students, we cannot use it with special education students. And that's something that we—
students that are in an ILS classroom, because often some people may believe, well, it has to be a totally different intervention, and many times it is, but it does not always have to be something that's totally different than what was used in the previous classroom.
And when you're examining the effectiveness of an intervention, if it doesn't seem immediately effective, it doesn't mean that you need to switch an intervention necessarily.
Absolutely, good point.
You'd have to vary one of these 7 dimensions, one of them or several of them or all of them. And that may be what it takes to make that intervention adaptable to that student and effective for that specific student. Now, again, we showed you this graphic before. We're coming back to it just because it shows you the data-based individualization process on the left-hand side. It's a process that we're all basically familiar with, which is that you begin the intervention, you progress monitor, you take that diagnostic data, and you adapt the intervention as needed. And then you progress monitor again, and then you determine, is the student responsive to the adaptation you've made or non-responsive? And it's a continuing cycle that cannot stop.
That is based on data. And we really, I know we're saying that a word a lot in this training, but the teachers inside of the intensive classroom are data driven. And as all teachers should be, but these children have experienced a great deal of failure. And some of them have failed in the interventions. So we have to look at whether or not the intervention, number one, was valid, whether the usage of it was valid at the top, and we're looking at data through progress monitoring to determine whether that is. You see the plus and minus on both sides of that. And that diagnostic data then does drive what happens next. So it's really important that people understand that when you meet together and talk together and you're looking at data, we have to look at the right data, and we have to look at the amount of data that was given for students.
Now, this is a closer look at the data-based individualization, a more in-depth look at the various steps involved. so that you see the selection of the validated intervention program and the questions that you need to be asking at each step. And when we say you, we don't mean just the teacher, we're talking about the IEP team. So we're looking at, have we selected an intervention program that's valid? Then we're looking at the intervention itself. Are we progress monitoring? What does the progress monitoring data show us? Is the intervention working?
Now, this third one is often one that is skipped. When we ask the question, why didn't the intervention work? There usually is somewhat of a silence because they don't have an answer, but it is a valid question to always ask involving interventions. Why did the intervention? And you see here, they give you, there could be several reasons. There's no right or wrong, but we need to know, are there multiple data sources that confirm it? Have there been both some academic or behavioral explanations that could have happened? There could have been trauma involved. There's a lot of different ways that academic and behavior could mix together. And then what do these data suggest about what needs to be changed? We often skip to, let's go to another intervention. This is not working. And as you can see in this database instruction, this is actually going to give us a lot of information once we determine why the intervention didn't work. The next step of adapting an intervention, the intervention means that you've got to go back and fix what was broken to continue to see whether or not then it will still work. What change is needed? And I have to say, Joyce, I know you can agree with me, these 3 steps, probably 3, 4, and 5, how often do you think it happens?
Yeah, that's often where people get bogged down for various reasons. And that's why we see the IEP team as critical to all special ed services, but particularly to the intensive learning support setting. Because when a student reaches the level of intensive learning support, it's not just the teacher working with that student. It's that continuous progress of data mining and progress monitoring. And that, again, as we said, involves the IEP team.
And you see that in step 4, Joyce, the hypothesis, along with the educator expertise, is used to develop an individual student plan. So another plan is written up for modifying or adapting that intervention to better, even though you thought it was meeting the needs, based on the data, we need to adapt it, change it, and then we have to then go back and use it again. And you have to ask yourself those questions. Are the procedures in place for implementing and monitoring? Are only a few adaptations made at one time? So all of those things that you're asking is for the sole purpose of determining what change is needed and then developing a plan. And then following, then executing that plan so that the plan is used to help you determine, number 5, did the change work? Because we do know that there are some interventions that don't work for children, but it has to always be based on data. And unfortunately, I don't see it enough when we are called in or when we actually sit in litigation. Unfortunately, we can easily just use these last 3 steps, and it actually kind of always points to one of those usually.
So for our last activity, to really emphasize the importance of the IEP and the IEP team playing a part in this process, we want you to go back to the ILS asynchronous session links file, pull out that video that we were looking at previously, the high leverage practice number 20 intensive intervention video, and continue where you left off and look at a mock DBI meeting. You can see from this slide that it starts at marker 10:07, 10 minutes and 7 seconds into the video. And you'll see a mock meeting, and you'll see the teacher and the members of the IEP team discussing data-based individuation as it applies to a specific student. And take a look at it, see if it's similar to meetings that you have or what you see in the meeting that you might want to duplicate in meetings that you have. Are there any evidence-based practices, any high leverage practices that you see occurring that you may want to adopt or adapt to your practice? So thank you for joining us today. And as always, we'll be available during our virtual office hours for any questions or issues or further training that you might want to participate in.
And then please look for our survey that we will be sending out to you. We have new ILS teachers that have come into situations and that they don't, they're not aware of what is available to them. So we're trying to really find out exactly what you have. So would you please take a few minutes to just, I know this is still summer, and but if you would do that, that would greatly support the programming overall. We thank you so very much for your time, and we look forward to talking to you very, very soon. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.